You guys are watching The Debrief, and if you're joining us right now, lots of breaking news. As you just heard, the White House releasing a 5-page memo of an unredacted 30-minute phone call in July where President Trump asked the president of Ukraine to investigate a political rival. So as you know, President Trump is the 45th president of the United States, but he made history yesterday as the 4th president to have calls for impeachment from the House of Representatives. And he spoke earlier about all of this, so let's take a listen to it.
The letter was a great letter, meaning the letter revealing the call. That was done at the insistence of myself and other people that read it. It was a friendly letter. There was no pressure. The way you had that built up, that call, it was going to be the call from hell. It turned out to be a nothing call, other than a lot of people said, I never knew you could be so nice. So part of the problem you have is you have the fake news. You have a lot of corrupt reporting. You have some very fine reporters and journalists, but you have a lot of corrupt reporters, a lot of corrupt journalists. I would rate you right in there, by the way.
All right, so we have full team coverage, and I want to begin with our chief justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, who was actually there this morning when this memo was released. Pierre, I just want to hear what your thoughts are, because this memo sounds like the president's actions very unambiguous. Everything's clear.
Well, the one thing that jumps out from the transcript that we were able to review and is now publicly available is that the President of the United States did directly ask the President of Ukraine to investigate his political rival, Joe Biden, and his son. He asked him to investigate, and it's clear. He invokes the name of Rudy Giuliani. His personal attorney says he is going to be involved. He also invokes the name of the Attorney General of the United States as well.
And Pierre,
so it's pretty clear that, you know, it's unambiguous. That's the thing that jumps out about the situation.
Was it surprising to you to see that the Attorney General was in this document?
Well, I think a lot of people were surprised by the fact that the president is essentially acting as if that he is going to direct the Attorney General to call the president of the Ukraine and get him involved in this. And the Attorney General is supposed to have a level of independence. So it's very, very clear that this will be a subject of great concern from Congress. They're going to probably be calling the Attorney General up to ask him about this. There are questions about the whole sequence involving Rudy Giuliani as well. And the other big headline here as well is that, as you recall, the Inspector General of the intelligence community was the one who first saw this complaint from the whistleblower. And when the Inspector General did a review of this complaint, the Inspector General ultimately concluded that it was credible and of urgent concern. We now know that the Inspector General, in addition to wanting Congress to review this matter, he also sent a referral over to the Department of Justice and to the FBI asking that the President of the United States be investigated for a possible campaign finance violation. So the system was stressed at the highest level. The Justice Department did a review, ultimately decided that there should not be a further investigation, that there was no campaign finance violation, but I don't know if Congress is going to accept no for an answer on this issue.
Yeah, so the memo of the phone call has been released, but do we know if this whistleblower complaint is going to be released as well?
Well, that is a matter of debate. It has to be declassified before it is released. There are some indications that the White House might go ahead and release it. There's also a question about whether the Inspector General's review is going to be released as well. So lots of unanswered questions, but we did get an answer to the question of, did the president put pressure on the president of Ukraine to investigate his rival, Joe Biden? And the answer to that is a categorical yes, that did happen.
All right, so I want to bring in Catherine Falders and John Santucci in our D.C. bureau. And John, I just want to get your thoughts on this. You know, how is the president going to be able to say whether this is national interest or personal interest?
I think that is one of the $64 million questions, and God knows we have a lot of them today. First and foremost, I think the most important thing that we took away from our briefings that we received prior to this release is that for everyone telling us over the last couple of days, Catherine, that this was not going to be that big of a deal from the White House's perspective, were they reading the same document we were? Because time and time again here, and 8 times, we are seeing the pressure leveled on the Ukrainian president by President Trump. Now, he doesn't say it directly, but says it'd be great if you could look into this. It'd be great if you work with Rudy Giuliani in this. That William Barr, the Attorney General, which was someone we did not know from our reporting over the last couple of days that was going to be in here, is mentioned in this document, Catherine.
Right. I think that's significant that the president repeatedly suggests that he will have the Department of Justice work with Rudy Giuliani in order to investigate this. I know that already Democrats on Capitol Hill are jumping on that. The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, has come out and said that Bill Barr should recuse himself. So you will continue to see calls from the Hill on that, too. That is one of the main things that they're focusing on.
And really the paragraph that I think, Kim, is the most damning here, and I know we have it up, hopefully we can show it on screen, is really, for those following along with us, the top of page 4, and this is where I'm going to pick it up. This is the president speaking. He says there's a lot of talk about Biden's son, that Biden stopped the prosecution, and that a lot of people want to find out about that. So whatever you can do, referring to the president of Ukraine, with the Attorney General, Bill Barr, would be great. Biden went around bragging that he stopped the prosecution. So if you can look into it, again, speaking to the president of Ukraine, President Trump says it sounds horrible to me. That is going to be one of many sentences we're going to see House Democrats and congressional investigators latch onto. We've already seen reporting out there from other outlets that Democrats want to bring Rudy Giuliani up to Capitol Hill. And most interesting to me as well, I know I'm saying that a lot because there's a lot of things interesting to me in this document, Kim. Rudy Giuliani's name is first brought up by the president of Ukraine. And he tells President Trump that his assistant had direct conversations with Rudy Giuliani prior to this July phone call, Kim.
Absolutely. I'm also curious, how much of the focus do you think will be on Joe Biden? Obviously, everyone's poring over the details of this call, but, you know, people might also wonder what actually happened with Joe Biden for it to even come up.
Yeah, I think obviously there's a case to be made in the reporting that we've done surrounding Joe Biden and Hunter Biden. But I think that there will be significant attention on the fact that regardless of who did what, is that the president of the United States is asking his personal attorney in the Department of Justice to look into a political rival, essentially. So I think that will be the focus. Now, whether the focus is on the investigation of Biden in general and what he did, that's to be determined, but that's what Congress is focusing on.
But I do think we're going to have to see what the playbook here is for both sides of the aisle, right? Because we haven't really seen any Republicans come out and condemn the president. The farthest we've seen anyone go is former Massachusetts governor and current Utah Senator Mitt Romney saying that he was deeply troubled by his initial read of the transcript. Other than that, we've not really seen anyone come out and say troubled. But it will be interesting that if Republicans use this impeachment fight, Kim, to go after Biden in it, that's definitely going to call into question where the priorities are. Because, again, this is in black and white. We can see right here what this phone call is and what President Trump said and what he did not say.
And just one more point on that, I think, and Pierre was touching on this a little bit, but what our sources, what you and I have been reporting, John, I think we also need to see that complaint. What our sources tell us, it's going through a declassification process. They want to be transparent and release it, but we need to see what from that complaint was so troubling to the whistleblower, what they overheard, if they overheard a comment, and how it relates to that transcript. Once we put all the pieces of the puzzle together, perhaps the calculus shifts on Capitol Hill even stronger.
And then to see if the whistleblower actually goes up to Capitol Hill and testify. Their lawyers have offered that. Congress has wanted them. And now, Kim, our understanding from our reporting is that the White House has no intention at this moment to continue to block the whistleblower. They will allow that individual to go up and cooperate with the congressional inquiry that's being launched.
All right, John and Catherine, I want you to stick with us, but I want to move on for just a second because the Speaker of the House has launched this formal impeachment inquiry, and a lot of people hear the word impeachment and they think that this could be the end of the presidency, but there is a process, and it doesn't always mean that a president is being removed. So I want to bring in Elaine Kamar from the Brookings Institute to explain how these votes actually work in Congress. Elaine?
Yes, hi, thank you. It's a little bit confusing, but actually it's fairly straightforward. There are 6 committees that are involved in investigating the president. Those committees will make findings, and the Judiciary Committee will then turn those into what are called articles of impeachment. And each of those articles of impeachment will eventually be voted on by the full House of Representatives. In past impeachments, for instance, some of the articles have not made it over to the Senate. In other words, the House took some and rejected some. So that will be the step. Those will be the steps that take place, let's say, in the next month or two. The minute articles of impeachment are passed by the House of Representatives, they move to the Senate, and all business stops in the Senate. This is very important because this then takes precedence over any other business. So the Senate can't delay action on impeachment. Business stops and a trial proceeds with the president's lawyers there and with the lawyers for the House of Representatives representing sort of the prosecution. And that trial has to begin, that process begins very, very quickly. No other business goes on because obviously the framers of the Constitution realized that if you were going to be involved in impeachment, you had to get to it pretty quickly rather than holding the country in a sort of a never land for months or years. So this will move pretty quickly once they write articles of impeachment and then vote on them.
Yes, I think that's very important to understand. So it is a process, and as we said, it doesn't necessarily mean that the president will be removed from office. So I want to thank Elaine for breaking that down for us. And I want to bring in Terry Moran because, Terry, you have covered these impeachments before. There's been Richard Nixon, who resigned. There was Andrew Johnson back in the day, but you covered Clinton. So what do you think of this coming up again, 4th time?
Well, the first thing to say is that impeachment is a trauma for the country. The impeachment of a president is a national trauma. There's nothing, it's not a game show. It's not a partisan fight. It is a trauma. It is the nuclear weapon in the Constitution, and the American people have from the very beginning understood that. They've understood how serious a matter it is to overturn an election. Impeachment and removing a president from office would overturn a presidential election. And that is one reason, that seriousness, that's one reason we have never done it. No president has been impeached and removed from office ever. Richard Nixon resigned when smoking gun evidence came up, and he didn't have the will or the support to fight it. But it shows how serious it is, and the American people understand that. So one thing is that this is very serious business. And the other thing is that it will, as Elaine just said, dominate our agenda to the exclusion of almost everything else. We now know that during the Clinton impeachment, when the country was consumed with the blue dress and Monica Lewinsky and the rest of it, Al-Qaeda was incubating its 9/11 plot, and maybe we took the eye off the ball. Maybe we in the media, maybe the Congress, maybe the president, maybe no one was really defending the country because we were so busy getting wrapped up in impeachment. So the final thing I would say is that electing a president is the one thing Americans do together politically. It's the only thing that we all do together. We all decide, we fight, we argue. People vote one way or another way, and we get a president. That is a national act. Removing a president also must be a national act. It cannot be partisan. And at the end of the day, the people to watch are those people in your community, in the country at large, in the Congress, who are kind of in the middle, take this pretty seriously, and aren't going to go to their corners right away and fight like they do on cable news and Twitter. Those are the people who hold the balance of power for this president, should this proceed forward based on facts and evidence toward impeachment and a trial.
And Terry, just before you go, you know, when you were covering the Clinton impeachment, that took roughly 3 months from start to finish to get to the votes. But what happens if this process goes into an election year?
Well, it'll be the issue of the election, to the exclusion of health care, to the exclusion of gun control, to the exclusion of the foreign policy of the United States. It will dominate the election. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. Well, people will want to hear candidates' plans for health care. They care about that, about education, child care, all these things. But there's no question that the political energies of the country will get wrapped up on this should it proceed forward to impeachment. And so there's a cost to impeachment. It is incredibly divisive, incredibly traumatic, and it does represent the ultimate sanction the Constitution has politically. We should be careful with it, and I think that's the attitude of most Americans.
All right, Terry Moran right there. Thank you so much for breaking that down. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm with Jordan Phelps right now. I'm going to come back to you in just a second, but I want to go to Meredith McGraw, who's at the White House, just to see what the president was tweeting this morning about all of this. Meredith.
Hi there. President Trump is continuing to call this a witch hunt, saying that there's no quid pro quo. He said just earlier in a meeting on Venezuela that there was nothing inappropriate about this phone call that he had. And the White House, President Trump, and even his campaign are trying to paint this as a political win. They hope that impeachment could work to their advantage in 2020. But behind the scenes, there really are concerns about what this transcript really might mean for him politically. I talked to a White House official last night who said there was, quote, much ado about nothing with this transcript, but it actually paints a very different picture. And the president is at UNGA today. He's going to be repeatedly asked about this phone call, but we'll have to see exactly how this plays out for him.
Yeah, and I just want to ask, obviously the Democrats have been making a lot of noise, but not much noise from the Republicans. So any more word from his base?
Well, I thought it was so interesting yesterday and actually extraordinary that Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell unanimously passed a resolution calling on the Trump administration to release that whistleblower complaint to congressional intelligence committees. And as has been reported by our team, the White House is considering making that happen. It's going through a declassification process right now. But Republicans on the Hill are going to have to stomach this, as are President Trump's supporters. And the RNC said that they've raised $1 million off of this, but that was before the transcript itself came out and people had the chance to see for themselves exactly what President Trump had to say on that phone call with the Ukrainian president.
All right, Meredith McGraw right there at the White House. And as I said, I want to turn to Jordan. Jordan, you've been covering the president at the United Nations. It's just kind of hard to imagine that he can have any conversation with world leaders when this is hanging in the balance.
Kimberly, this is completely overshadowing the president's official agenda here at UNGA. He had a meeting this morning about Venezuela. We aren't getting any coverage today about what happened in that meeting other than the president's response on Ukraine. And then, Kimberly, this afternoon, you can't make this stuff up. The president is actually sitting down with the president of Ukraine, who, of course, is at the center of this whole controversy. That meeting, of course, was on the agenda before this story blew up as it has. It's almost like a TV show could be written around this script. Kimberly, that is going to be a wild event. There are going to be reporters in the room there jostling to ask questions of both President Trump and President Zelensky about this issue. And then, Kimberly, we're going to get even more questions from President Trump later this afternoon when he holds what will be a freewheeling, crazy, I'm sure, press conference that's going to cap up UNGA. But of course, it's hard to see that any questions on the president's formal agenda will make it into the script at that press conference.
Yeah, it's almost like, can it get any more chaotic than it already is?
It can't.
Didn't think it was possible. But you said that President Trump was also tweeting about the Speaker of the House today, yes?
Yeah, the president is there on Twitter trolling the Speaker of the House now that she's moved forward with this impeachment inquiry, something she has been so reluctant to do, Kimberly. So it's really remarkable to see her taking this step. The president tweeting out a video of Nancy Pelosi back during the Clinton impeachment, saying that Republicans, or at that time, were impeaching not on the basis of fairness, but with a vengeance. And she said that Republicans were paralyzed with hatred for President Clinton. And that was what was going on there. The president obviously now trying to turn Nancy Pelosi's words words on their head and trying to turn this into Pelosi doing the same thing that Republicans were doing to President Clinton at the time. It is going to be a very heated political battle ahead, of course, Kimberly.
Absolutely. And I want to go back to Catherine Faulders in our D.C. bureau because, Catherine, there's a new tweet from Representative Adam Schiff.
Yeah, Schiff, the House Intelligence Committee, I'm pulling up the tweet now, he was saying the transcript of the call reads like a classic mob shakedown. You can see his tweet right there. We do a lot for Ukraine. There's not much reciprocity. I have a favor to ask. Investigate my opponent. My people will be in touch. Now, I'll mention that Adam Schiff yesterday was in a meeting with Speaker Pelosi when she was meeting with the chairs of these committees that are investigating the president before making her announcement. So Adam Schiff and people like Chairman Nadler were in that meeting. And just to kind of come back, John, we were talking about this a little bit, to how this will play out. The Speaker has told these 6 chairs to continue their investigative work and to turn over their evidence, at least from what my sources are telling me, to the House Judiciary Committee, which would then refer articles of impeachment to the full House after they've gathered all that evidence. And I was just speaking with a source a second ago who said that the House Judiciary Democrats are going to meet this evening. It's a previously scheduled meeting, but in that meeting there will be some talk about the way forward here.
Yeah, and so, John, Devin was in New York yesterday, and one of the things he brought up that I thought was really interesting is that this incident is digestible because it's just one phone call as opposed to the Mueller report that was like 22 months of lots of layers that people maybe weren't able to break down in their heads. But just to keep everyone on the same page, if you can just give us a timeline of how this all went down from the start of the complaint all the way to this inquiry.
I'm sorry, I had a little bit of PTSD there when you said Mueller. Just to think that was a few months ago.
Yes.
But anyway, moving on to this. Yeah, I do think this is a little more digestible, but it's still going on. So let's go back to June. This is when the Department of Defense first announced $250 million in aid for Ukraine. And then we learned in the middle of July, and we actually just learned this, Kim, in the last couple of days, that President Trump instructed White House Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney to put a hold on that money. So June 18th, the money is put aside, ready to go. Trump, middle of July, says hold tight, don't do it, and has Mulvaney step in. Then at the end of the month, on the 25th, the president has that call, which we've now obtained the transcript of, with the new president of Ukraine, Zelensky. And on that phone call, as we've now learned from the transcript, they are obviously discussing an investigation into former Vice President Joe Biden. So let's fast forward here. The next month rolls along into August, and that's when the whistleblower, who has not been identified yet, but that individual files their complaint with the intelligence community and the Inspector General. At the end of August, the Inspector General's team passes the complaint to the new Director of National Intelligence. And then in September, Kim, that is when the deadline passes for the DNI to alert Congress about this whistleblower report. And of course, we learn about it in the coming weeks, first reported by the Washington Post. But I do think here, this is where we're going to have to figure out what happened in the course of the IG getting involved, because after that deadline passes, the Inspector General is expressing concern to the House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff, who obviously Catherine just heard from. And then one day later, on September 10th, Kim, Schiff actually pens a formal request for the full whistleblower complaint. And the next day, the Trump administration agrees to release previously frozen aid money to Ukraine. But it's from September 10th to where we are now that things have sort of gotten mucked up. Because remember, we learned about this first at the end of last week. We were not hearing anything from the White House or allies close to the president. We were hearing they were looking into the matter. Now we've started to see the dam break into them doing something. So first things first was the transcript. We now have that. Now the things we have to wait for is the complaint. We are told by our sources that the White House is not standing in the way. They are working on a declassification process to turn that over to Congress, we expect, as soon as the end of this week. The last piece of that puzzle is what happens to the whistleblower. Does the whistleblower go and can appear before members of Congress, meet with congressional investigators. We are told, Catherine and I, by our sources, that the White House will not stand in the way of that matter, and they will allow the whistleblower to go up to Capitol Hill.
And John, I think it's important to hit on, as you have, is that we have the transcript, we'll have the complaint, the paper will be out there. We have the acting DNI before the committee, the House Intel Committee tomorrow, but this isn't done, obviously, from the Capitol Hill side, but not just as it relates to impeachment, but the investigative angle of this. You're going to see more subpoenas for Rudy Giuliani and for the State Department, for example.
But the other thing I think is really important here, Kim, just for our viewers, look at that timeline we just ran through, right? Because the idea of Mulvaney stopping the aid, we had actually heard of that over the last couple of days, but that was not part of the initial reporting. There's a lot more work to be done here, and I do think sort of what is going to come from this transcript is what happened after this phone call. Did the president pick up the phone and maybe have a conversation with Rudy Giuliani? Did Attorney General William Barr have any conversations directly with Ukraine, like President Trump is encouraging President Zelensky to do here? There's a lot of things we need to follow up on, a lot of threads to be pieced together, and frankly, a lot of holes in this timeline that we're going to have to figure out.
That's right.
Yes, Congress is going to be very busy. I want to thank John.
So are we, Kim.
Absolutely, definitely you will be. John Santucci and Catherine Falders in our D.C. bureau, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kim.
Yes, good to see you guys. So, Jordan, I want to come back to you before we wrap this up. President Trump called it the perfect call. He called it the perfect call, and here we are.
Yeah, Kimberly, it's hard to see who's going to swallow the president's spin on this one because we have now seen that memorandum, and it shows the president directly asking for a favor. But Kimberly, as we move forward, you know, impeachment is at its heart a political fight. So not only in the sense that Congress is making this political calculation of whether or not these high crimes and misdemeanors, if they meet that bar by their own political definition, if that's great enough to move forward with articles of impeachment, but also out there in the bigger sense, we're entering a campaign year. So this is going to be the dominant issue on the campaign trail. We've been talking a lot about where is the American public on this. We see Democrats in Congress kind of leading the way for their constituents with moving ahead for this. But Kimberly, as this moves out to the campaign trail, we're going to actually see how voters are responding to this, whether it actually backfires on Democrats or whether it helps them. Nancy Pelosi has been so cautious until now because she knows that impeachment is a double-edged sword. It can both help or hurt her caucus, and we're going to find out.
We will find out. Jordan Phillips, I have to say, good to see you in New York
so good to be
instead of D.C., so I hope you come back often. And guys, if you can even believe it, we're turning to another embattled leader with chaotic politics. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson back in the UK after the Supreme Court ruled his 5-week suspension was illegal. So I want to bring in Julia McFarland with the latest. Julia, good to see you. So he flew back from New York today, and he had a phone call with the Queen.
Hey, Kimberly, exactly. It was that bombshell Supreme Court ruling yesterday, as you said, that found his suspension of Parliament unlawful. It sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom that were felt across the Atlantic Ocean, of course, as Boris Johnson was forced to cut short his trip to the US and come back to the UK to face the music this morning. One political observer on Twitter noting that broadcasters had chartered helicopters to follow the Prime Minister's car, tracking his journey from Heathrow Airport back to Westminster like he was O.J. Simpson. Now, he is due to speak in the House of Commons in just a few minutes, and he will be facing an incredibly hostile crowd of lawmakers all morning since MPs have come back to Parliament. There have been calls for him to stand down immediately. Politicians have called him a disgrace. He's been called a zombie prime minister by the Scots. Now, the PM's options are running out because we, of course, have that Halloween Brexit deadline. The Attorney General this morning hinting that the government wants one last attempt to try and get a general election to try and strengthen the Prime Minister's hands. So, I mean, Kimberly, if things start to get a little bit quiet over there in Washington, I can guarantee you the next few weeks here in the UK, we can keep you very, very busy and entertained over here.
Oh, my goodness. I don't think we can keep up. I really don't think we can keep up. Julia McFarland in our London Bureau, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And guys, if you want to stay updated on all of these headlines and all of the chaos going down today, you can go to abcnews.com or download the app, the ABC News app. But you need to stick around for the briefing room at 3:30 p.m. And then you can check out World News Prime at 8 p.m. And again, download the app or go to the website if you want the latest headlines and updates. So thanks for joining us today. Jordan, good to see you. And I will see you tomorrow.